Hi crafty folks, Amy here with amyswares, and today I'm going to batch some sentiments for my binder and make a simple card. Now I recently got this from Simon Says Stamp. It's super cool. It's a bunch of Spanish sentiments with coordinating dies, and I have this new 3D embossing folder from Altenew that I'm going to use as well. So here's a photo of the finished card, but a lot of this is just going to be some trial and error and also batching these sentiments. So many of you are interested in my storage system and how I have a sentiment binder. If you aren't familiar, I will show it in a little bit, so stick around. But basically a lot of it is just finding ways to save time and pre-batch a bunch of the components so that I can kind of just refer to my binder of pre-made items and kind of just go with the flow and not have to stop and create a sentiment. So the first thing I'm doing here is I'm basically creating a template. So I'm getting a bunch of blank die cuts, but I'm also creating a template with a half sheet of cardstock. You could see it doesn't quite have to be that big, but I just cut a piece of 120-pound accent opaque because that's typically what I use for pretty much everything. And I just cut a bunch of those out. Now I'm going to nestle this template into my MISTI, and you can see I actually have one of the, I think it's a waffle flower stick mat in there, which also kind of helps hold on to these die cuts. Now I'm going to leave the template in place, and then I'm going to just put a bunch of these in and then line up the stamps. Actually, at this point, I'm like, I better line up the stamps first. I wasn't entirely sure if these dies were a little bit too close, that the stamps were going to be too big and touch, but they weren't too big. So that worked out good. You can absolutely cut all the little attachment pieces, like snip them, but I just found it easier to keep it in one piece for this purpose. But they're actually intended to be snipped apart. I'll probably just keep them together as long as I can, just so I can keep doing something like this and kind of save time. But basically you can see I'm nestling in the stamps within these openings, and then I'm going to pick all the stamps up with my MISTI door. Now you'll see this doesn't go quite perfectly. I do need to make some adjustments, and I'll kind of explain that to you as I go. But I'm going to pick them all up, and then I can just basically put in all these little white die cuts and then just stamp them all kind of in one fell swoop. So I'm going to put in all these pieces, nestle them in like a puzzle piece. I'm just conditioning those stamps with my hands because I haven't used them before. So you can do that with your hand or with an eraser. You're basically just getting the manufacturer's goo off of the stamps, and then that way they'll kind of stamp better. It's kind of like seasoning them. And you can see that stick mat is really kind of helping hold these little puzzle piece die cuts back in place, which is a super handy component. Now I decided to start with, I think it was peacock feathers, distress oxide, just because I felt like it, and I was looking at all my pretty oxide stamps or stamp pads behind me, and I thought, hey, I'm going to use one of those. So I realized pretty quickly that some of them weren't lined up great. So I'm kind of inspecting it here, looking at the margins and realizing, oh yeah, that's not great. So I'm pulling off the ones that are not great, and I'm kind of repositioning them on there. And I just figure, well, these aren't going to look great. I'll just end up, you know, pitching those ones that I have to realign. But you'll find out in a moment that I actually was able to use those too. And I'll show you the happy little accident that took place. So I was able to use all of them without waste. So just, again, kind of repositioning. What I could have done here to eliminate this step is I could have maybe put a scrap piece of paper underneath the template to see how it lines up instead of, you know, risking wasting these little die cuts. But as I said, it wasn't a huge deal. It ended up okay. So to start, I'm using the same color. Again, this is kind of trial and error. You're watching me in real time and kind of work through my process. So I used the same color again, and then I realized, like, oh, I can't really see where I moved it to. So I decided to use a different color. So I took out all the ones that were good. I left the ones that were bad. And look at this. Happy little accident. So I had all those colors, and it ended up looking really cool. So even though it was technically a mistake, it had a cool outline of different colors. So I was able to keep using it. So anyway, I did it a bunch of times. You can see with all my die cuts, I have some teal, I have some black, I have some gray. I put them in their little piles, and then I grabbed a new sheet of these baseball card pockets. I have two different kinds. This is the one I typically use for my critters, actually, because it has a little bit of a lip and it holds them in. Honestly, I was just being lazy, and that's the quickest one I found in my stash. But either will work. You just need to be careful. The ones that don't have the lip on the top, you don't want to dump your binder upside down and kind of have them all spill out. But now I have all those sentiments ready to go. Super excited. Add them to my stash. And then now I decided to move on to the embossing. So this was interesting too. There was some trial and error here that takes place, but I wanted to use up some scraps. So initially I was thinking, oh, maybe I've got some pattern paper or colored cardstock, and I landed on this really pretty mint colored. It is like probably a 65-pound, just an inexpensive colored cardstock, and I thought, oh, well, I'll do that versus plain white. And then I'll run this through my new cool hexagon 3D embossing folder. And look at this. Super, super cracked. I was a little surprised because it was such thin cardstock. So I grabbed another piece, same paper, saturated it with water because I'm like, okay, maybe it just needed water. It'll help it bend the fibers around. And nope, still cracked. So not as bad, but still cracked. So I decided to grab a panel of 120-pound accent opaque, spritzed it with water, and boom, that worked. Didn't crack. However, I did discover one little corner was a little suspect. I had to make sure it didn't kind of come detached. But that just happens sometimes. I don't know if you collect these embossing folders like me, but I find the ones with really short connection points that are really angular sometimes, like this with these sort of lines. Here, there's the corner that was iffy. Sometimes they just really destroy the paper. So it just kind of depends on the embossing folder. I'll just have to remember to use a thicker cardstock with this particular embossing folder, but it looked great. And the white, I was able to use the Gracias that was kind of messed up. And I used a piece of, again, scrap cardstock that was colored from my folder. It had some watermarks on it, but you can't see it, and it's got a nice matching border. And now I'm going to add some bling. So these are my bling packages of joy from A Colorful Life Designs. There's all these amazing colors to choose from. These make me so happy. I use them on almost all my cards these days, but I'm picking what one I want to use. I was initially thinking one of the blues, which I could have done, but I ultimately ended up going with this really pretty, it's called Crystal Iris Aurora Borealis, and it's gorgeous. So I put them down in odd numbers and a smattering across the front of the card, and that's going to finish the design. So if something doesn't go to plan, just stick with it. I'm sure you can save it. I'm sure I'll find some use for those cracked panels and that mint, but just bear in mind, you know, all embossing folders are different. Everything sometimes just takes a little bit of trial and error to figure things out. But I hope you enjoyed my storage system. This is typically what I do to kind of fill up my binder. So when you get something new, maybe find a way to save time and batch a bunch of it up. So thank you so much for spending time with me. If you enjoyed this, please hit the thumbs up, and I will catch you next time. Bye.